Oh, hi there. Welcome back to the Lost Media Archive. It's good to see you all again. So now I'm going to be talking about Super Kid Icarus. The Italian game magazine, Game Power, released its 25th issue in February of 1994. In that issue, it had a little blurb which talked about an upcoming game for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, and it said that this game would be Super Kid Icarus, a remake of the original game Kid Icarus, released in 1986 on the Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, a few months later, over in England, a British magazine by the name of Superplay would mention it in June, as Superplay had a thing where readers could send in letters, and then editors at Superplay would reply to them. And one child named Matthew sent in a letter wishing that there was to be a new Kid Icarus game for the NES. And the writer said that there actually was going to be a new game for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, and that it was going to be unveiled the, at the Summer Consumer Electronics Show that June. But if it wasn't shown there, it was going to be definitely shown at the Winter Consumer Electronics Show in that January 1995, and that it was going to be set for release in early 1995 too. Now, after this, it was mentioned 2 years later in March of 1996 over in the United States of America by a video game magazine known as Game Fan on in issue 3 volume 4 where it talked about the game. Now, most of these three mentions only give a brief bare-bones description of it. We don't know about the gameplay, what it would have actually entailed gameplay wise. They just talk about how it's going to happen, it's going to be released. Now after this last mention, nothing came of it. No more mentions. No one else talked about it. No release. No screenshots. No word from Nintendo, because these are all third-party magazines. You know, Game Power, Super Play, Game Fan. These are Nintendo Power. These are third-party game magazines. So it was never any mentioned officially by Nintendo. So what happened to it? Well, some people think the game never existed. There was no Super Kid Icarus. That's very unlikely because we have an Italian game magazine, a British game magazine, and an American one, which means that they would have either A, very unlikely been working together, or B, they all just happen to come up with the same idea. But that's very unlikely. I mean, what chances are of level of coincidence happening like that? Not very little. So most likely there was a real Kid Icarus game in development, and that for one reason or another, the game was canceled and never released. But why was this game canceled? Because we know because there definitely was a game definitely being made. I mean, a writer at a game magazine wouldn't most likely wouldn't make up something like that. A game to be shown off, at the Consumer Electronics Show. That's something they probably wouldn't make up. So what could have caused it? Well, in its original February mention in 1994, specifically in the 25th issue of Game Power, it says that the game was going to be 24 megabytes. But then, 2 years down the line, 1 month in Game Fan, it said that it was going to be 32 megabytes. That's an 8 megabyte jump. And alongside that, the Nintendo 64 was only a few months away from being released, as in Japan was released 3 months later in June of 1996, and then 3 months after that, it was released in September here in North America. So I propose my theory is that sometime, most likely either in May or June of 1994, something in development caused the game to change from being 24 megabytes to 8 megabytes. And most likely, they had to either rebuild the game entirely to build a bigger game, or it took, or the sudden extra load was just too much for them to bear. And we, of course, Super Kid Icarus was never shown at either conventions, and it was never released. So most likely they had to cancel. But the game magazine had already gotten word about it, and they just didn't bother to tell them that it was had that plan to change. Most likely because it was too late to tell them, or by the time it happened, they were already it was already out and released into the Mac that issued the magazine. So one reason or another, they changed the game from being 24 megabytes to 32 megabytes, they had to either overhaul the entire game, start from scratch, or this extra load of 8 megabytes for more gameplay, which is a burden on them. And due to the fact, and it slowed down development of the game, and due to the fact that the Nintendo 64 was soon to be released, Nintendo decided to just cancel the game altogether, and that it just wasn't worth it for a console that was soon to be obsolete with the release of the newest console already. And Kid Icarus didn't really sell well when it was initially released. It got lots of praise and was well received, but it didn't do well in sales. So most likely Nintendo just didn't figure that it was worth it all for this, especially for a console that was again soon to be dead with the release of their newest console, and which would feature such classics such as Super Mario 64, amongst other games. And most likely either and most likely there's maybe some build of it lying around somewhere in the halls of whatever game studio or was developing it, or again, the slim possibility that it never existed, that there was no Kid Icarus, that they all just kind of a coincidental hoax, of course. But I believe, and most logical explanation, there definitely was a Kid Icarus game in development. They were making it, but for one reason or another, they just couldn't get it out. I mean, back in the 90s, that much of a jump may have been a bit much for most game development teams at the time, especially for a game dedicated, especially for a remake or sequel to dedicated for a game which I didn't really sell well. But, anyways, that's all I gotta say, ladies and gentlemen. Well, bye, have a nice time.